there is an opportunity in this problem. And you may not know what it is now, but if you don't get consumed by the anger, the grief, the sorrow, the frustration, feeling bad for yourself, feeling like you're a
Right.
victim of the circumstance, there will be something that will come out of it. There will be a silver lining, and there might even be in the midst of struggling with the problem, a solution you didn't even know you need to other problems, or maybe even alternative that's better than the problem that actually you're presented with, or that.
Danny Frazer, welcome to the Executive Dad podcast.
Nick, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I know we've kind of had a serendipitous or kind of around the way to be connected, but it's been great to be reconnected in the last couple of months. So I'm excited to have you on the show. Danny, you are a leader in the behavioral health industry and you have been for 25 plus years at this point. Can you just start by sharing with me and the audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be on your show, and I'm excited what you've got going. I've listened to your two prior podcasts, so humbled to be invited. Um, Gosh, I'm not even sure exactly where to start, but I'll just say it's because of my own life experience that I was drawn into being someone that will help others transform. And it's in large part because of my passion and enthusiasm for sports as a kid, played a lot of team sports, loved the camaraderie that came from that. I also loved sort of overcoming challenge and adversity. And then I was fortunate at a young age to be introduced to the outdoors. And I learned that there is a field where you can help people transform through nature immersion. And that career track led me in the late 90s when I graduated college to begin working in wilderness therapy, where I worked as a guide and moved my way up the sort of corporate ladder for a sort of large at the time organization. And sure enough, had a chance to help partner in creating a program back in 2006 and have been grateful to serve, in that program, which is Open Sky. We served over 4,000 families
Wow.
and helped young people with mental health and behavioral health issues and families who were in distress and dysfunction, find peace of mind and feel grounded again and come away with real, tangible, practical, applicable resources that they can then, transfer to the rest of their lives. So it's really meaningful work. And I've had a pivot in my career, as you know, Nick, and we
Yep.
reconnected because we had found each other kind of as you were pursuing wilderness therapy.
Correct.
Had some great dialogue as you were kind of looking at sort of stepping into this work, which I know you did. And unfortunately, we didn't get to do it together, but we closed our program a little over a year ago now. And I had a chance to take a big exhale. And I actually came back from a vacation with my family, which was something that was just so delightful after having helped run a business for 18 years. And I was like, oh, I got to find a job. And so I go into Indeed and I go to Glassdoor and I'm just like, nothing is speaking to me. Nothing is calling me. And I'm like, I have to do what I've been doing. And it's just going to be in a different form. And that's where you and I have kind of connected because I want to provide support and coaching and mentorship and leadership for leaders and organizations in behavioral health care and education that are doing transformative work. It's hard, it's stressful. You know this. Having someone who can be there who's not part of that silo, of that organization, has got some objectivity and brings some life and leadership experience can really help leaders and organizations grow and thrive. And so that's what I've set out to do. And it's been great and along the way to connect with you and be kind of one of your people in sort of in network and learning from and learning alongside.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you giving us the background, although it was brief. I know there was 25 plus years in there
Yes.
somewhere, but I do want, and I know I've told you this personally, just because this is a leadership podcast, when I reached out, I was looking to get into the industry and really knew nothing about behavioral health or outdoor behavioral health. I was pursuing my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and I applied to Open Sky because I saw you were doing amazing work and, you know, within maybe a day, the same day, I think I got a phone call from you and I was like, oh, the program director, this guy's got to be important. And you took not only that time that day, but additional calls to ask me questions, to get to know me, to learn about what I was looking to achieve in the industry. Obviously, I wasn't maybe the typical person who applied to be a field guide or another role. I was a little bit older and had some different life experience. But you were just so uh, empathetic and warm and open to having conversations with someone that is just applying. So that spoke to me as far as who you were as a leader and why I was so excited to reconnect later on. Although it didn't work out there, I did go on to work in the industry as a program director as well for a short time compared to you, very short time. Um, but I am familiar with the amazing work that you did as an individual and Open Sky. So I wanted to share that experience and that lesson you taught me as a leader. A few years ago. So I really appreciate that.
Well,
Just for the
let me give credit where it's due, Nick. I had a team who said, "Huh, this is someone," because we have all kinds of staff who are reviewing resumes and cover letters, and they were like, "I think you should reach out to this guy." And so I just credit our culture and our organization that had some, systems in place that said, "Hey," and then I remember just sort of the connection and the rapport that we had right away. And I'm always excited and enthusiastic when someone is fascinated by this work because I want to help them like I had those people help me, flourish
right.
in a place that needs people who have heart and soul and who are interested in making a difference.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about systems and processes here at some point in our conversation. Just for the audience's awareness, what were some of the leadership challenges that were unique to outdoor behavioral health? Because there are leaders, and we're going to talk to leaders of many different industries, but I think outdoor behavioral health is such a unique one. And I didn't give you this question, so it may be off the cuff. I'm challenging you here. What is one of those unique challenges leadership wise? And you were definitely in leadership roles throughout your time that you faced as you were serving in outdoor behavioral health.
It's a great question, and I'm speaking with a veteran, and you might appreciate this because, like perhaps being someone who's always got um, soldiers, if you will, somewhere at some point, because we always have people on duty to protect and support this country and our mission. Wilderness therapy, we never have a pause or a break or a timeout. From the time
Yeah.
we opened our doors at Open Sky in 2006 to the time we closed in 2018, every single day we had a client who we were responsible for. And so, as leaders, it's a really unique challenge and at times burden to know that there is never an off season, there's never really a holiday or a vacation, and that can be, for lack of a better word, kind of draining, insidious, taxing. And so for I think leaders in this space, you have an unpredictable client, you have in the wilderness an unpredictable setting. Um, so there's inherent dynamism. It's always happening. So what can you do to counteract that? And so as a leader in this field, to be able to sustain yourself, you've got to have, I think, a lot of systems and processes and a mindset and relationships, work and
Absolutely.
otherwise, that can
Yep.
kind of counter the demands that you never know when the phone's going to ring and there might be a kid who's missing or someone who's injured that needs some sort of potentially extraction, including like a helicopter evacuation. So the stakes were high, always on, and you have to learn how to manage that. And so that's something that is distinctly unique to being in leadership in this field.
I can't think of a possible better unique answer than that one. And that resonates so deeply with me as my time at First Light Wilderness as the program director. That's ultimately why I chose to step away as our daughter was coming soon. And it was the consistent phone calls, and this maybe goes back to my lack of efficiency as a leader with systems and processes. As I stepped into that role, we didn't have a lot of that. And a lot of it did fall on myself, my field director, who would be my, second in command, where I was. A lot of late night drives out into the middle of nowhere. I'm an hour away from where our students were. A
Mm.
lot of dynamic situations, as you shared. And yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that will resonate. There is no turning off. Whereas a typical leader from work gets to turn off and focus on home, where in that environment, perhaps you were focused on both at all times, which I'm going to use as a segue to ask you about being a dad. You've got two sons, Everett, 12, and Donovan, 10, correct?
That's right.
So two boys. And my question around you as a dad before we get to your principles is what is something they have taught you in the last few years?
Wow. It's a good question. And I think there's so many different places I can go with that. Um, Gosh, I would say the thing that stands out, Nick, is they've taught me what, what I would describe is the most remarkable experience of love is. The love of a child. I mean, there's the romantic love, right? There's the love you have of maybe a spouse or significant other, which has, fireworks and it also has its ups and its downs, right? There is nothing like the unconditional love of a child and the joy that comes from that, but also the the kind of, and I think I mentioned this earlier, the opportunity for learning and growing that comes when you have a child and a spouse and you're trying to find ways to be on the same page. I mentioned my dad shared with me, when I was pretty young, that if you want to Zen master, have a child.
Mhm. Yeah,
And I think I said, well, if you want to have your own monastery, have a family. Because anytime you introduce a child to a partnership, like, man, it's also going to bring up a lot about how you show up as a spouse, how you
right.
show up as a dad. And so my children, although not deliberately, the lessons they give are just by showing up, and challenging me to be present. That's probably the most um, consistent expectation without verbalizing it that they expect of me is that when they've got an ouchie or a feeling, that for me to help them in some way or give them what they're looking for, I've got to be engaged and present. I've got to be able to empathize. I've got to be able to back off of my own agenda. So it's a constant exercise in being present, being engaged, um, for them. And yeah, and I'll just sort of add a little piece. I didn't realize this at the time, but parenthood, back to your prior question of being in a demanding leadership position, really in some ways is an interesting antidote because the moment I walk in the door, they could give an SHIT about whatever I was dealing with.
Right.
And like they expect me to be present. And that was actually really good because like, all right, if I'm going to be engaged as a parent, which I want to be, and I want to be there for them, it actually allowed me to kind of have a bit of a break from the stress and strain and maybe the anxiety that I've got from whatever's left over from work. And so I didn't realize it would both be challenging, but it would also be this sort of uh, again antidote to sort of the stress and strain of sort of my work life.
Yeah, I love the way you see both sides of that. The challenge of the challenging workplace, the demanding workplace with having a family, but then the beauty of, hey, they demand that presence. And I think that's one of the challenges many dads and many leaders, both at home and work, face in today's world with technology and all the distractions that are present. How are you showing up with your full attention with your child? I know it's something I continue to work on. It's never perfect, but when my daughter, even though she's 18 months old, walks over and she's got something she wants to talk about in some foreign language to me currently, it's important to her. And although I'm like, I don't understand, why is this important to you? Why is this toy important to you right now? It's important to her. So how am I being present to acknowledge and to show her that same level of love that she shows me and that I feel when she runs and jumps in my arms or, just does these selfless acts of love that are hard to find anywhere else, right? So
Yeah,
I appreciate you
so true.
sharing that.
So true.
Let's get into your three principles. I know you put a lot of work into these, which I am so grateful for, and I know the audience will be grateful for. So I'm excited to dive in. Danny, what is your first leadership principle?
Well, thank you, Nick. It was a great exercise to have to whittle it down to three because, man, I had a lot on the drawing board before I kind of narrowed down to these three. And I'll start with my first one, which is something that I was taught. And all of these are I'm regurgitating, and I'm sort of, as my dad would say, there's no such thing as creativity. It's just plagiarism that's been undetected. I think that's actually from Mark Twain, right? And and this is one that I really appreciate, which is as leaders, our job is to determine what, but not how. And I'll elaborate. Um, so as leaders, on the one hand, we need to provide guidance. And some of that is like vision, right? Like, where are we going? What's the outcome? What's the goal? And to a certain extent, um, I'd say not to a certain extent, to a large degree, we also have to give rationale or reason. Like, why? Why is this important? Why is this meaningful? Um, and so, as leaders, if we can say, hey, this is what we aim to accomplish for our clients, this is what we aim to accomplish maybe for our organization, here's why that's important. But then we back out of the how and really allow people to do their job that they're hired to do.
Mhm.
And if we get into micromanaging and kind of dictating too much of the how from a place maybe where we once were, like, again, I'm sure there's some great analogies in the military, but I was a field guide. I did that work in wilderness therapy. I know what it means to make fire. I also did that a few decades ago.
Right.
Things change, right? And I'm not in this organization at this point in time. And so if I can say, hey, we need to create the safest atmosphere we can for our clients, because we owe it to them to have an environment that is both physically and emotionally safe,
Right.
because that becomes the foundation for them trusting us and being willing to take risks. And that's kind of the what, and to a certain extent, the why. It's like, all right, how do we go about that? And then that's eliciting our team into a conversation. They now know, oh, this is where we're going. This is why that's important. Okay, what can I do in my job, or how can I contribute to making sure that we get there? And it's a way to invite engagement. And I'd say the same thing applies at home. you know, um, at our house, it's important that we have a clean and orderly house. Like that's something that my wife and I, we just have determined, hey, this is what we want. And the reason is it makes it easier to, find what we're looking for. And it's presentable to guests. So we kind of are defining the what and the why. And then we've kind of said, you know what, we value also that you all contribute to that. Like that's important to us, that you as kids, going back now a few years, to helping keep our
Right.
house clean and orderly. And but we'll kind of let you all determine how you want to go about that. They needed some support. And so, we did build some structure, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's then up to them. We literally have a weekly set of chores that have to get accomplished, that are about cleanliness and organization. But actually, we let them, between the two brothers, determine who's going to do what, even what day of the week they're going to do it. All that matters is we say, hey, by the end of the week, these chores are done. And I'll never forget, my son is getting ready to mop the kitchen floor, which is one of the chores. And I'm like, well, the mop is over here. And he's like, no, I'm going to do it this way. And I'm just sort of like, this is how mommy spot mops. And I'm just going to do the whole floor that way. And I'm like, what? It's like we use this little bucket, and it's just like a couple like rags, and it's literally on hands and knees like mopping. And I'm just like, hey, I'm not, if that's how you want to go about it, it's all you, man. And so
Right.
giving them some engagement, giving them some autonomy around how to accomplish that. And even when they put it into their day. And there will be times when like, oh my gosh, I should have done that chore, and it's 8 o'clock and we're going to bed in an hour. And they might be like about to fall apart. And we might intervene and say, hey, this is going to happen because you should have done this earlier. But doing what we can to give them some autonomy just increases buy-in and engagement. And sure enough, Nick, we've had this chore list and this schedule. It rotates kind of on a week-to-week basis for like 3 years. And they continue week after week, almost without much effort, to do chore after chore after chore after chore. So,
I mean, just that in itself is a valuable takeaway. The chore empowerment of a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. If it's going for 3 years, that's what, math in public, 7 and 9, right? Um, that's a great takeaway. And I think the opportunities for growth, when you're given the what, you're given the why, you're not there to tell them what to do. And this is for your career as well as at home. The opportunities for growth, possibly through making mistakes, i.e., the bucket, hands and knees,
Mhm.
is exponential. Whereas if you just come in and say, hey, this is how it's going to be done, micromanage, if you will, the opportunity for growth is very limited, right? There will be some, but I know I've learned the most throughout my time as a child and continuously as an adult and a parent and a leader is through making mistakes. So I think that is a amazing takeaway. Leaders define the what and the why, not the how. Danny, what's number two?
Number two, and it's a little bit related. These kind of feel like they could even be nested, but I think that's the case with all of our principles, right? They often
Absolutely.
find ways of coupling and pairing. Start with structure. And I'll actually draw in from someone who I'm sure you're familiar with. I have the book sitting over here, Atomic Habits, James Clear.
Yes.
Early on in his book, because I'm like, okay, how do I optimize my behaviors to get the outcomes I want? And early on, he says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. I was like, man, there, he just hit the nail on the head. And when I start thinking of systems, like, there's a lot to that. Systems are kind of maybe a recipe, it's a predetermined process, it might be a framework, it might be rules of engagement. I mean, there's a lot of ways we can kind of talk about what structure is.
Right.
But I think building out a good structure and devoting time to formulating that, it saves you, for one, down the road, a lot of headache and heartache of trying to reinvent your those systems and processes and checklists over and over. Um, so, and I have a couple of examples that we use here at home and a couple of examples from work. Um, and so I'm a big fan of structure. And I think I've heard in your previous podcast that you are too. And there's things that we do probably in our personal lives as well.
Absolutely.
So I talked about our chore list, and that's a structure, that is in place. And they literally, week one, we have a whole list of week one is, and week two, we have a whole list of week two. We have a morning school checklist, and I have a dyslexic son, and so it's got pictures. And he wakes up in the morning and he knows what there is to get accomplished. And I'm not barking at him. He's also not having to remember everything. It's just a checklist.
Right.
And checklists can be applied across so many fields and so many parts of our lives. And it just sort of it reduces the amount of effort and energy, and then it makes sure that, hey, by the time I need to leave and be in the car to go to school, I have what needs to be done. And so that's a good example that we have, in our home. My wife is a big fan also of structure. And we have a schedule because she works for herself. She's a solopreneur. She's also on call. She has a lot of demands on her. She kind of knows how she wants to schedule things. So we have a cooking schedule. She does certain days. I do certain days. We even have a dish cleaning schedule, and it sort of, rotates. And then, of course, the best part is you'll appreciate this on Sundays. It says "Duke it out," or Saturday night, "Duke it out." But we have to, we rely on that structure, and it gives us some ease, knowing like, hey, I can schedule something. Hey, I can do something. Oh, I've got to prepare. And so it's just structures often, I think, create efficiencies. It creates a little work on the front end, right? You have
Right.
to be proactive. You have to build it. You have to be intelligent in how you craft that. And then ultimately, though, you can kind of lean on it and rely on it. It can also be applied to a culture. And so, one of the things I just want to share with you is like, and I might call it like a charter. So, at Open Sky, we had a risk management committee, and that committee's task was to look at safety incidents and accidents and to promote a safety culture.
Yep.
And what I realized is pretty quickly, you can get engaged in tit for tat, blame shifting kind of stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to create a structure at the outset that's a framework for how we're going to engage. And I built out essentially an acronym. We're going to collaborate. We're going to take an ownership mindset. We're going to seek to improve and learn. And so at the very beginning, I kind of created a framework that then said, hey, this is how we're going. It kind of gave boundaries for how we're going to behave and how we're going to
Right.
act and actually how we're even going to relate with incidents and accidents. And what I love is that ownership means like no matter how small or how big, everybody has a role in every failure and success. And so all of a sudden, instead of the admissions team being like, oh my gosh, our admissions are down because we had this incident that got publicity, it's like, wait a minute, we all have a role in this. And so structures and systems, I bet you and I could talk for a while. There's so many of them. I know that's part of what the work you guys do with your Sherpa coaching.
Yep.
There are proven methods and systems and processes that that then can give you some freedom. And that's what I like about structures is that they often people think like, oh, a structure, a framework, it feels limiting. My belief is actually creates a foundation that
Right.
actually allows often for more creativity, more productivity, more efficiency.
Absolutely. And I think I shared this on the last podcast, but one of my favorite, I don't know if it's a quote or just an idea. I want to say it comes from Jocko Willink, but it's discipline equals freedom. Because once you have that discipline of the framework, of the checklist, of the routine of your day, it allows for freedom outside or within the bounds. I think the easiest example way back when my background was in health and wellness, and it's like if you're disciplined and you're showing up every day, if you miss that one day, it's okay. You have the freedom to miss one day because you have the discipline, you have the system that you take care of yourself. You eat healthy every single day, and it connects the same to the checklist in the morning, the schedule of cleaning, the you know reports, and the culture that you're building. All of that is in the same line.
I had to write it down because I like it. And I'll share one more with you because it's a good one that I learned from actually a coach that my dad had, which is there's the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. You choose.
Yep.
And I think system, it takes effort to build a system. It takes
Right.
effort to create habits. It creates, but as soon as you do that and apply discipline, you're less likely to feel regret down the line. Anyway, and then there are two different
Yep.
types of pain, and one is a proactive pain, like, all right,
Right.
I'm going to get after it, and I'm going to do this, and then over time, that's going to, give me some freedom, and probably put me in a position to succeed and accomplish things that I want to do.
Absolutely. That tough conversation you don't want to have at work is painful. Having the same problem occur over and over with someone is also painful, right? So where are you leaning into pain? Beautiful. Danny, principle number three.
So this one, um, this is probably one of my favorites, and it's really about a mindset. And essentially, every problem creates an opportunity. Every problem. So, as a young manager, and I remember this, Nick, I'm in my 20s, and I don't know what it is, and maybe it's developmental, like thinking like, oh, we built the system, we've got the training, we covered this, and that somehow because we put all that effort into it, everybody's got it, and I'll never see that problem again. And as soon as someone brings me that problem, like, oh, like frustrated, disappointed, aggravated, inconvenienced, maybe feeling like they're pointing the finger at me or they're upset at someone else. And it's just like, oh my gosh, and almost like a craving for there to be less problems.
Right.
Like, hey, actually, if I get less problems, that means that I'm doing a really good job. And it took me a while to recognize, wait a minute, like there's no such thing as perfection. It does not exist, and it is inevitable that things will break down and that there will be problems.
Right.
And this is in every dimension of our lives, right? And so as soon as and it was in part because of my own coach, and I think we talked a little about this. I was at an impasse in my own career, and this is one of those gems that she gave me. I remember calling her up, and we actually had a forest fire shut down our operating area. The Forest Service had never shut down the San Juan National Forest here in Colorado in its 103-year history, Nick. And all of a sudden, they're calling me up to say, hey, in 72 hours, you guys can't operate here. And I'm just like, and I remember so vividly, and it can feel a little, I don't know, trite. It can feel, I'm not sure what the right word is, but insulting maybe to be like, hey, there is an opportunity in this problem. And you may not know what it is now, but if you don't get consumed by the anger, the grief, the sorrow, the frustration, feeling bad for yourself, feeling like you're a
Right.
victim of the circumstance, there will be something that will come out of it there will be a silver lining. And there might even be, in the midst of struggling with the problem, a solution you didn't even know you need to other problems, or maybe even alternative that's better than the problem that actually you're presented with, or that, or even the normal course of action that you've been sort of operating in. And so this is like, for me, that mindset, and it's easier sometimes to apply to certain situations than others, but there's a
Of
couple
course.
of recent examples that pertain to being a father. And it's kind of back tying in one of your questions about what my children have taught me. So I have it, my 12-year-old Everett is dyslexic. And it's big news when you sit down with a teacher and they're like, he's just not keeping up. And we don't know what's going on. It's my wife and I, and I'm getting teary eyed and I'm like, what's wrong? And then we finally get to the bottom of it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my kid's never going to leave my house. Like, he's not going to be able to get a high school degree. I mean, you just start going down the
Right.
rabbit hole of negative thinking and kind of
Worst
getting that
possible
spiral.
scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we end up getting him assessed, we get him treated, and then we get him into summer, essentially tutoring. And he has to work his butt off because it doesn't come to him like it does everybody else.
Right.
And I remember along the way being so impressed with, here's someone who at the time was like 8, who is having to put time in on top of school at home before any kids are doing homework hardly, and in the summer. And I remember talking with his dyslexia therapist, Michelle, wonderful woman. And she's like, you know what's so cool about this? Dyslexics become hardworking, persistent people earlier than most people. And that is an attribute
Mm.
that will serve him for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
Yes, it doesn't come easy to him. He wants to learn how to read, and he can now handle a level of hardship and setback that I don't think a lot of kids who are 12-year-old can handle. And at the
Right.
time, this is a big problem. And oh my gosh, is like, what is, but like, wait a minute, like there is a gift in this. And it reminds me, I worked for Outward Bound, and we like to quote the founder, Kurt Hahn, and he talked about your disability is your opportunity. And he's kind of drawing from Nietzsche, the German philosopher. Your
Yep.
disability is your opportunity. And I think of my child, and I think of others who have learning differences, ADHD. There is a gift and a set of skills, and there is an opportunity on the other side of that type of a problem. And I know we saw this with our students in wilderness therapy. A
100%.
lot of them are defiant, and right next to that is this willfulness. A lot of them might be depressed or anxious. Well, a lot beside that is this deep empathy and like being emotionally attuned. And
Right.
so for me, applying this both as a business leader, welcoming problems, because guess what? If I welcome problems and people can trust me, that's communicating something to them like, hey, I can rely on this guy. I can know that he's going to be there and have my back. They're also then going to bring me things that maybe I can prevent consequences from being even worse downstream. And so
Right.
it's crazy. I used to actually, I think some of my direct reports were kind of surprised because, like, oh my gosh, the bearer of bad news. I'm like, no, man, there's probably something in this is going to make us stronger and better.
Right.
And so that was the mindset that I brought to sometimes very difficult, challenging circumstances. And I've tried to apply that in my own life as well. And it's something that I'm grateful that I had the chance for my coach to bring to me.
Yeah, and what came to mind just now as you were sharing when people bring you problems is as a parent, as a leader, how are you creating that culture to where both your children or your subordinates or your peers or even your leaders feel comfortable coming to you with problems? Because if they're not willing, one, we're not going to be able to solve them. We're not going to be able to contribute. And two, we can't even remotely come to the opportunity for growth. So I think that's my next question is how do you create that culture? And let's focus, well, I want an example of both, but and maybe it's tied together, but we always want our kids to come with us to share what they're going through, things that are happening maybe at school or in the neighborhood, but we also want, our subordinates to come and say, "Hey, I think I messed up here,"
Mhm.
so that we can work together in a collaborative environment to get the best possible
Yeah.
outcome and impact business in a positive way. So how do we create that culture, Danny?
I'll draw on some stuff I know I've seen that you've contributed on LinkedIn, and I think we even talked about. I mean, the first thing you have to do is kind of pause, and you've got to be present and you have to listen and you have to really seek to understand and not jump to
Mm.
conclusions. And,
Yep.
and so I have to be grounded in my emotional experience, and I have to be really inquisitive and curious. And if I rush to judgment or to point fingers or to find blame, I'm not going to then encourage other people to bring problems to me. And this is
100%.
common in our culture, in part because we're litigious, in part it's human nature a little bit, to not want to be blamed, not to be the one found at fault. And so there is certainly things you have to do as a person, and there's things your organization has to espouse around what it means to bring problems forward.
Right.
And yes, some problems do require reprimand, or some problems do require disciplinary action, but you want to be as welcoming of that as possible and to try to look. And one of the questions I like to ask when a problem comes is what is to blame as opposed to who is to blame? Because people don't operate in a silo. And I happen to believe also, Nick, people don't show up to screw up work. They show up to contribute and make a difference. And then they
Right.
sometimes make mistakes. And some of that actually may not even be their doing. It might be that they weren't prepared. It might be that there's an incentive that's out of sorts that's drawing them in a certain direction,
Right.
that is misguiding them and having them sort of see things with tunnel vision. And so asking things like what is to blame as opposed to who is to blame, and then also I'd say if you can, even encourage people to bring things to you before their problems. And in risk management, we call near misses or close calls. And almost like inviting, like, hey, what, and a great way to do that after maybe an event, and maybe you guys did this in the military after a mission, is like you can do like a postmortem, like what
Yep.
happened, even if it was highly successful and you guys hit all your targets. If you spend time reflecting back immediately afterwards, what went well? What should we continue to do? What could we do better? That's a way to say, hey, this is maybe going to be the precursor to a problem downstream, as opposed to like, hey, I'm giving you this hot mess. And
Absolutely.
so there's a lot of different things that you can do, especially in an organization with your team members, to kind of invite problems that then can create opportunities for solutions, and refinement for your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. In the military, we had an after action review for everything, whether it was a single patrol or it was a larger mission or a training exercise. Hey, what went well? What didn't go well? How do we do better next time? And
Mhm.
then I tried to bring, similar to First Light. And I know in my current role, we do, what should we start? What should we stop? And what should we keep from this event or this presentation? Like what
Mhm.
worked, what absolutely did not work, or
Mhm.
what should we do next time? Right. So
Mhm.
little frameworks like that that you can figure out to set you up for success.
Love
Okay,
that.
Danny, those are your three principles. I feel like they were amazing. All of your hard
Yeah.
work and preparation paid off. We've got
Mhm.
leaders define the what, the why, not the how, starting with structure. And then a really powerful one, beside or behind every problem is an opportunity. Amazing. Now we're
Mhm.
going to get into the final section. I know you heard some of these questions on the previous episode. Then we have our mystery question from Jason Vonk from episode
Yeah.
2 that I know you're excited about. Danny, if you were going to send a text message to all of the executive dads and they were going to read it, they're not going to leave you on unread, what would that message be?
Nick, this is such a good question. And at first I was stumped. And because I'm thinking about, wow, what a collection of people and across so many different types of fields with kids at different ages. And it just hit me. Um, our kids will emulate our behaviors and they will emulate our attitude. And you know this, Nick, but leaders have the single biggest impact on the culture of an organization. So it'd be a really succinct message. Your attitude and behaviors at work are contagious, but especially at home. So lead a life you are comfortable with your kids emulating.
Give it to them one more time, Danny. That was well said. One more time so we make sure they hear it.
Your attitude and behaviors at work are contagious, but especially at home. So lead a life you are comfortable with your kids emulating.
I hope you guys heard that. If you didn't, rewind, listen to it again. I'm going to put that quote in the show notes as one of our major takeaways. Danny, I love that message. What is one habit, practice, or mindset that has greatly impacted your ability to show up, to be present and impactful as a leader, both at home and in your career?
So I'm gonna say there's a couple that I'm gonna mention. I know you said one, but I'm gonna talk about kind of at its core is taking care of yourself. And so for me, and part of my structure is I'm gonna sleep well, I'm gonna eat well, I'm gonna exercise. And like having those priorities, as a part of my nearly daily routine is going to set me up to be present. And being present as a leader to me is listening and seeking to understand. But guess what? If I'm distracted because I'm sleep deprived or I haven't been eating well, or like I feel a little bit sluggish, I'm not actually going to be as attentive. I'm not going to be as present. And so for me, that foundation is just like health and wellness, taking care of myself. Sometimes it's mental health, sometimes it's relational health. But
Yep.
like, hey, really tending to that then allows me to be present, fully present with people and listening and seeking to understand is, what I consider to be one of the most important attributes of a leader.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of men, dads specifically, struggle with making themselves a priority. The natural assumption, I think, is to sacrifice yourself for your work, sacrifice yourself for your family. But all you're doing is limiting your ability to be the best you possibly could. So by you putting yourself first, mental, physical, emotional, relational health, you're able to then show up 10x, 100x to what you would have if you weren't the
There's
best possible
something,
place.
yeah, there's like a way it scales exponentially. Like, okay, yes,
100%.
I'm carving out this time. It can feel selfish. I've got to sort of put that thought at bay around like, oh, I'm not fully focused or devoted to my work or my family. And I've got to have, it's like, wait a minute. That actually allows me to be more engaged and more present, which therefore means I'm actually more effective and more efficient. So it sounds like you and I know that I knew that before this, have that in common. And I definitely
Absolutely.
see a lot of executives out there who are sacrificing a lot, but there's also plenty of them out there too that are highly successful who prioritize health, well-being, those intimate relationships, and in turn are incredibly successful and also remain healthy as
Right.
well.
And it goes back to the previous quote, I believe, from your dad's coach,
Mhm.
the pain of discipline or the pain of regret,
Mhm.
right? It's hard to take care of yourself sometimes,
Mhm.
but the pain of not taking care of yourself is also very
Mhm.
challenging. All
Mhm.
right, Danny, we're going to land this plane with, I'm getting the journal out.
Uh-oh.
Mr. Jason Vonk left you a question, and then you're
Mhm.
going to get to leave a question for our next guest.
Mm.
And he asked, what is something you are learning right now that you are excited about?
Gosh, that's such a great question. And it's been really fun transitioning from running a business for 18 years that was high pressure. Again, clients always with us, staff always on duty. And a lot of that time, the quadrants urgent and important, right? Or,
Yep.
or not
Eisen.
urgent, not important, as
Yep.
some comes from Stephen Covey and sort of I've been able to now sort of shift gears and spend time in this not urgent, but important category. And one of the things I'm really diving into is what makes an effective leader. And I've enrolled in a course called the Leadership Practices Inventory. I don't know if you're familiar with it or
I'm not.
LPI. And there's 5 leadership behaviors. It's probably the most researched leadership inventory, and it's behavior focused, which I like because
Yep.
behaviors are things we can engage in. They're structures and systems, right? They're processes that we can choose to do.
Right.
And it's essentially, they've taken 75,000 leaders to come up with these 5 different behaviors. And they're going to be things you're familiar with, but I'm engaging in an online course to get a coaching certificate so I can employ an assessment tool. And then it actually builds out kind of a bit of a rubric to help develop leaders across a range of industries. And of course, I want to apply this in a sort of behavioral health, mental health, and education space. So that's what I'm currently stoked to be getting into.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I know we talked previously about where you wanted to take your future and how you wanted to show up as a coach, consultant. What does the future look like to continue your impact in the industry? And that sounds directly in alignment with what you wanted to achieve, and I think what you are already great at and how you will continue to impact. So I appreciate you sharing. Danny, it has been an honor to share you with the listeners of the podcast. This is going to be evergreen, so I hope more it's as time goes, more and more people listen and get the value from you. We may even have to have you as a repeat guest down the line. It has been a real treat to share time with you and to go on this journey with you. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate it.
It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. And I appreciate the opportunity because your questions actually help me even get more clarity, which is the sign of a good coach. So, Nick, well done with not that that was what you intended to do, but I appreciate the benefit from this. So it's a pleasure and excited to see what unfolds for you in this podcast and your career too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Where can people follow you, support you, kind of get on you know, the bandwagon of Danny Frazer?
Yeah, so I've got a website. It's being crafted, but there's a landing page there. Look for that in the next few weeks, month or so. You can find me at gaintheridgeconsulting.com, gaintheridgeconsulting.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. So if you find Nick Mann, you can find me
Yep.
because we are connected there. But you can just look up Danny Frazer, Gain the Ridge Consulting. Definitely like to be out there. I'm really excited by what LinkedIn has opened doors for me and given me as a resource. So that's another place where I'm very active.
Great. If you're listening to this and you want to follow Danny, we will have those links in the show notes as well. So be sure to check those out. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with another executive dad or someone you think would benefit. Leave us a 5-star review. We love comments wherever you're listening or watching. And we'll see you on the next episode. Danny, have a great day.
Hey, you too. Thanks, Nick. Take care.